Hello, everybody. This is Mrs. Lara at Texas Almas College. And today I am going to show you how to create a structure and use that structure to fill an array reading data from a text file. So there's quite a bit going on here. This is for students currently taking Programming Fundamentals 2. So this is a review on arrays, text files, structures, and also functions. So I already started with a template right here. Don't forget, very important, your heading information, program description information. So real quickly, just so that we don't forget, for your notes, this program uses text files as input and displays contents to the screen. Structures, arrays, and functions are also covered. Right. So the first thing that I'm going to do is include a text file that I will be using with my solution. And there's different ways of adding your text file. You just have to make sure that your data file is found in the same location as your .cpp document. So we can do it easily from Visual Studio. So notice that right here we have where we have the name of the file. In this case, I'm naming my file input txt.cpp. So right here where it says source files, I'm going to right click and I am going to add a new item. Now I am only giving options for headers and classes and .cpp. So that's okay. Go ahead and choose a C++ file. But down here where you're going to give them the name, just give it the name that you want. I'm going to call my file data.txt, all right? Data.txt. So it's a text file. And notice that it will be placed in the same location as my entire CPP solution in Visual Studio. So by the way, I'm using Visual Studio 2019, but it is the same for earlier versions, 2017 and 2019. So I'm going to add. Now I have here my data.txt right next to my input.cpp. So in my data.txt, I am going to place some quick information. I added here a few names. So I'm going to say Johnny, I'm going to say Johnny Doe. Johnny Doe. So this is going to be student information. Johnny Doe, gender male, age 24, age dash junior, male 19. Lisa Marie Games, female, age 21. And I mean, I can keep going. I'm just going to do these three just for display purposes. You guys, of course, do as many as you need, depending on your assignments and other needs. So I'm going to save this. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save all and close my .txt file. But it's still right here. If I ever need it, I can just go back to it. By default, I'm going to use ifstream for my CIN and COUTs. I am going to need string because the name for my students are going to be strings. And very important, I am going to need the ifstream heading right here, this preprocessor directive, to use input and output, to use files as input and output, right? Let's not forget what these do, important, to use strings for full names, right? And of course this one to use CIN and COUT for input from keyboard and output to screen. All right, I will be using my namespace standard so that I don't have to type my iOS all the time, but this is optional, okay? All right, so I will have a global variable for a size of an array, I will be using an array to input all the data here. So I'm just going to say this is a constant and will be a short. I don't really need a very big number. And I'm going to call this size, and I am going to assign it 50. All right. This will be the maximum number of students in a class. All right. Obviously, if you have a class that has 300 students, well, then your array will be much larger. But notice that my text file only has 3 students, okay? But I'm feeling lazy. I don't want to type 50 students right now. You guys can do that on your own. All right. I will have an area for functions. I'll do that in a moment. First, I need to declare my programmer defined data type. We'll be using a structure for that. So keyword struct for structure, and I am going to name this person data type. Okay, you can call it whatever you want to, but I want to use person data type. And the reason why I'm including here the keyword data type is just so that we remember that a structure is not going to be right here. Person data type is not going to be a variable, but this is a type of data type, just like an integer or a double or some other intrinsic data type that we have learned so far. Remember, you have an open and close curly braces with a semicolon. Very important to have that semicolon. Now, remember that my text file had a name, and that will be a string. And I'm going to call this variable name. I will have now I believe it was the gender. So I'm going to use that as a character for gender. And finally, a short number for your age. All right. That's it, those 3 ones. And remember that this is not what holds the data. This structure is just like the blueprint so that you can create a variable of that particular data type. So that we don't forget, let's go ahead and go to main, and I'm going to create an array of that particular data type. I could always do this and say student, right? I'm going to say I want to use a person data type, and I am going to create my variable student. Okay, so what I'm doing right here is that I have created this student variable that holds a name, a gender, and an age. It's a special variable that has 3 subvariables inside, right? Now, because a class usually has more than 1 student, that means I need multiple variables of person data type. Now, I can say student 1 and then student 2 and student 3, and yes, I misspelled student, right? Student 4, and so on and so forth. But you know, that's just not very efficient. So we might as well just use an array since all of them are the same, right? So I am going to create a student array, and I'm going to call it student array so that I know it's an array. And this one will be of size, right? At this point, that means the maximum size that I will have will be 50 students. All right. So now that I have that ready, now I need to populate this array with data. And remember that all the data is coming from my text file, right? Right now it only has 3 students, but remember that for these 3 students, each student has 3 pieces of data. So this is a total of 9 inputs. So if I were to do this from the keyboard, I mean, if it's a small class like this one, 3 students, not a big deal. But imagine I have a class of 50 students, and every time that I run my program, I have to enter 50 times 3, 150 items. Well, that's too much. So that's why we need that text file. So there are different ways of doing this. I want to use a function to be able to read my text file. I am going to do it this way. There are multiple ways of doing it, but this is the way I'm doing it for this example. I'm going to have a function that will return a number. It will return a counter so that I know how many students there are in my class. So this is a return type short. I'm going to call this one get data. Okay, get data. And it's going to have a few parameters. Obviously, the first parameter that I am going to need is going to be that text file. So remember that text files need your ifstream header file in order to be able to read from them or to write to them. Now, ifstream has two other types here, two other types to create these objects, and one of them is your ifstream. So you have ifstream, ofstream, and fstream. The scope of this class, Programming Fundamentals 2, we only look at ifstream for using a file as input and ofstream for using the file for output. Right? In the next section, we'll look at fstream, which does both. So we're going to use ifstream, which is part of the fstream family, file stream, right? And any text file that is passed to a function needs to be passed by reference. So we're going to have that symbol right here, which is the ampersand, and that means that this file will be passed as reference. And the reason for that is because we don't want to have get data to have its own copy of the file because the file could be huge, right? If you're doing a database and the database has a file that is, 20 gigs in size, then having a copy and multiple copies on each function, well, that is a lot of waste of memory. So we just pass this by reference so that we're accessing the original file. I am also going to need the array. So I am going to need an array here, which will be, of course, my person data type. And in the function prototype, all we need to do is add the two brackets, and this symbolizes an array. Arrays are also passed by reference, but this is by default. So just for arrays, I do not have to add the reference symbol, but for text files, I do. But know that an array is always also passed by reference by default. Right? Semicolon there, because this is a function prototype, meaning that I'm going to be doing my definition elsewhere. Now I'm going to need probably another function, but we'll get to this function in a moment. So now that I have this, I am ready to open up my file and pass it along. So I am going to let the user give me the file name. I'm going to say string file name. Okay. Holds the name of the text file. And I will ask the user to give me that name. So enter a file name with .txt extension. You can always do data validation. I will leave the data validation for you to do in a different time. Now we enter that text file name. Okay. And we also need to have our file ready to open, right? So let's go ahead and do this. I am going to go ahead and create my file object, and I'm going to say this is going to be ifstream because I need it to read from a file, and I'm going to call my object input file, just like that. Okay. Now I need to open my input file. Okay. So let me just put really quickly a comment here. Creates an object to read from a text file. And now I'm going to open this text file. And remember that I am using the name that the user gave me. Okay. If I didn't give the user the option to give me a file name, then I would actually put in double quotations the name of the file like this. Okay. But since I am letting the user give me the name, I will just do that. Okay. All right. So this is open the file and links it to the text file. All right. So now that we're ready, we should check to make sure that we have this file correct. And there's multiple ways of doing this. So I'm just going to do something very simple here. And I'm going to say if my input file fails, right? This means file was not found, or maybe it was misspelled or something, right? So there was an error reading a file. I am going to just make a quick comment and say error reading file, try again. And ideally here, I'm going to give the user the opportunity to re-enter the file, all right? But I will let you do that at a different time. We'll do the validation later. Right now, I just want to make sure that I get that going. And then I'm going to say else, and this one will be file was opened successfully. So that means that if nothing went wrong, so if something went wrong, we tell them, hey, I couldn't do this. But if nothing went wrong, then let's go ahead and call our functions and do all this. So I'm going to go ahead and say, all right, everything went well. I am going to send you my information so that you can get the data. And remember, this is a return type function. So I need to have a variable that will get a counter back. I will explain this in a moment. So I'm just going to create a short, call this one class size. Okay. And this will hold the number of students that are found in that file. So I'm going to say that class size is going to be assigned whatever is returned from my get data function. And get data function needs to have two things in order to do its job. And one of them is your input file, and the other one is your student array. Okay, semicolon. All right, and now this is important for whenever we're calling the function, you don't have to include the data types anymore. So again, notice that up here we have the data types, but in the function call, you just send the name of the variable or the object. You don't actually use the data types anymore. All right, so let's hold on here. We'll return to this part right here. But right now, let me go ahead and actually do my definition of my function get data. So I am going to do this down here. So here is my function get data. For this one, because this is an actual function definition, I don't need the semicolon at the end. Now that I have what I need for this one, I do need to name them. So I am going to say that this is an ifstream that I'm going to call ifile, just so that we know that it's different. But remember that we're accessing the original file anyway. But I'm going to call it ifile as a type of alias, right? And here, my person data type, I'm going to call this one array or student array. Okay. All right. So now let's go ahead and read our information. So I am going to need a counter because remember that this is an array. So my array will start from 0 and it'll continue until, we find our last item in my text file. So I am going to use a number, and I'm just going to call this one counter, right? And I'm going to start it at 0 because our arrays start at 0 by default. And I will use a loop. Now, here is where it gets confusing for a few of my students, a few of you, is what loop should I use? Well, you can certainly use a for loop. I know for arrays, by default, we go to for loops because they seem to be made for that. But remember that in a text file, you don't really know how much data you're going to find in that text file. I happen to have a text file that only has 3 students, student 1, student 2, and student 3. But that's because I know right now. But what if later on a different instructor has a class that has 15 students? Or maybe another instructor who has 49 students or 37 students, right? And every class is a little bit different. So you really can't use a for loop if you're not sure how big that class is. And yes, we have a limit of 50, our array is 50, but if you use a for loop and go from 0 to 50, you're going to enter your first 3 students and then everything else will be empty, and it's just not very useful. Now, there's other ways, of course. Later on we're going to look at ways that we can use different structures instead of arrays, structures that we can actually grow and shrink as we need. But for right now, we have arrays, so we need to make them work as best as possible. So what I'm going to use is I am going to use a while loop, and I am going to continue to read the file, not the array. I'm going to continue to read the file until I reach the end of that file. Okay. So I am going to say that while my ifile, so while my ifile, and it looks kind of weird because you're saying, well, while ifile what? Well, this is saying is while there is data inside the file, right? While ifile has data inside, start reading, okay? Now remember that the first item inside my data file is a string, and it happens to be a string that has spaces in between. So this is very important. We cannot just use ifile by itself. Remember that ifile kind of resembles a CIN, and CIN stops reading when it reaches a space. Well, ifile will do the same thing. When it reaches a space, it will stop reading. So you need to use something called getLine. We've reviewed this before. So we're gonna say getLine. That way it gets everything, including spaces. GetLine, and we say from where? GetLine using your ifile object. And whatever we get from the ifile object is going to be stored into my array. And this is my student array, okay? Sub counter, in other words, at this point is student array sub 0. And remember that this array is special because this array has other variables inside because it's an array of structures, okay? So we're gonna say student array sub counter dot, and notice how immediately I get 3 options. Well, which one do I want? Well, at this point, I want the name. So I'm going to use the name, okay? And that's it. I'm just going to do that for now. Now that I have gone past getLine because this one's a string, the other ones are just normal. So we just say ifile. Remember, we use our extraction operator because ifile is almost like a CIN, except that instead of reading from the keyboard, we're reading from a text file. So ifile array sub counter dot, in this case is gender, and then the same but for my dot h, right? Okay. Now, little tricky thing about get lines, that you may have a end of file, sorry, a new line character. Just remember that your data file has, in this particular case, I have a new line character to go to the next line, right? So I may have some data laying around there that I don't need. So I am going to use the following, ifile dot ignore, so that I can flush out any extra new line characters that are in there, so that I can continue reading without any problems. Okay. Now, so I'm going to actually say that here. Ignores any trailing new line characters. Okay. All right. Now, of course, I need to update my counter plus plus. Okay. Because I need to go to array SRA sub 1 and then SRA sub 2 until it reaches the end. So this one may not go all the way to 50. It will just go where, wherever we finish. So to know how many students I am going to have in my class, well, guess what? Remember, I have this return type. Well, let's return that counter. Right? So if I have 3 students, it'll return 3. But if I have 7 students, then it'll return 7, right? So now I know how big is that class for this particular file. All right, so let's go back. So this one finishes, it populates my array, and it returns the size of the class. Okay. All right, so let's go back to main. Remember, this is main, and we're here in the else. We just called the function, it populated the array, and it returned the class size. Perfect. So just to know, I'm going to say cout, the size of the class is, and I am going to print out class size. Okay. And I always go a little crazy with new lines, but I like to leave enough spaces so that I can read what I'm doing. All right, so now that I have that, well, I want to check if this actually worked, if it actually put all the data where I need it. So I am going to print my array. All right. Oh, one thing that is very important that sometimes we forget to do, and I almost forget, every time that we open a file, we need to close it. So I'm going to close that file right here, input file dot close, just like that. Okay. So if we open a file, we must close that file. All right. So anyway, let's go back in here and let's create another function that will display whatever is in my array. So this one will be a void function, and I'm going to call this one display array. So, makes kind of sense what this is going to be doing. And this one will need, I no longer need my text file, but I will need my counter because I need to know how big my class is, and I will need my array. So I am going to pass my data type, person data type array, comma, and I am going to need my short counter. Okay, there we go. All right. So now let's call this, and we're going to say display array, and we're going to pass your student array and that class size, right? So that we know what it is, right? Now I am going to come down here, and I am going to actually declare that function. So let me just go ahead and copy this. Okay, and I'm going to go at the end of my other function, get data. I am going to paste it right here. I'm going to get rid of that semicolon because this is a function header, not a prototype, and open and close bracket. And here I need to actually give my array a name. I'm going to use the same as array, and this one will be my class size. I'm just going to use a C for class size. Okay. Oh, well, actually, no. Let's call it counter. Yes. Okay. All right. And the reason why I call it counter is because C is not very descriptive right now, and we wouldn't later on. We might not remember what that C stood for, right? All right. So let's just create a loop to display the students. Okay. So very simple. This one I can actually use a for loop, no problem here, and I could say for my short C, right? This is for my counter, mini counter that starts at 0. So this is my subscript, right? And while that subscript is less than my counter, let's say C++, yay, and I am going to be displaying all my data. So this is simple. We are pretty much doing the same thing we're doing here, right? But without, needing to have the ifile. We're just accessing the file immediately. And I am going to print the following. Cout student number. I'm going to say right here, in this case, this is going to be student 1, because remember that my subscript starts at 0. So if I just add a 1 to it, just on the go, it's going to tell me 1, right? So that's good. Student number 1, and I am going to just, actually, there we go. All right, and we'll go to the next line. And we'll say here, cout, so print to the screen. So this is no longer to a text file. This is printing to the screen what we find in student array sub C dot name. So everything that's there is going to print that. All right. And I am going to go ahead and just do a comma and a space. And then I'm going to print student array subscript dot gender, comma, space, that's not a comma, space, and your student array subscript dot h. And this one will just be a period and a couple of blank lines, actually one blank line, right? All right. And that should be it. I don't need to worry about a counter because this one is updating by itself, and we should be good to go. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens, right? Just to make sure that we're done here. Let's see, we have everything done. Everything looks good to me. I am just going to say right here, cout thanks. Why? I don't know, but it's nice. It's always nice being polite. So let's be polite. All right, and let's run this. So debug, start without debugging. Please enter a file name with .txt extension. So I'm going to say data mining which we know that is not the text file name, right? So error reading file, try again. Now here guys, remember you may want to have this in a loop because it's very annoying to have to restart your program every time, right? But I'll let you do that in on your own. So debug, start without debugging, and let's do the data.txt because that's actually what we called it. And the size of the class is 3, student 1, Johnny Doe, male 24, Abe Nash Jr., male 19, and Lisa Marie Gomez, female 21. Thanks, we're done. All right. So let's say, let me go back to my text file. Let's add another person here. Allison, Allison Simpson, and we'll say that she is female and she is 23, and we're going to have Patrick James. He's male and he is 18 years of age. 18 years of age, young. All right, so I'm going to close this. Do you want to save? Definitely save. All right, and let's run this again. Start without debugging. Data.txt, and the size of the class is 5. Yay! Johnny, Ave, Lisa, Allison, and Patrick. Thanks. And so there you have it. You can control the size of your array in this manner. Again, this is not the only way, but this is, it's a nice, simple way. Right. Thank you very much, guys. And I'll be seeing you in class. If you have any questions, drop me a line, send me an email, or stop by during my office hours. Bye.